I'll take the easier one first. Is it morally acceptable? I think it's, I never had a career. I don't even understand the idea of a career. So, to me, I've had an incredibly productive time teaching and creating this center around youth rights and children's rights and representing kids in court and kind of pushing around justice and race in Chicago and in the United States. So, I feel like the campaigns we've done and the issues we've taken on are politically pointed and cutting and strategic. It's edgy, yes. I think sometimes it's edgy. I think my background is edgy, and so that comes up, every 5 years as a question for the university. But in fact, it's a great place if you don't, care about job security. To me, it's a great place to be. It's actually a great place to be. You write, teach, you have your outside political life. And I think what we do is political in a human rights broad sense of the word. And I think human rights provides that kind of framework around social justice that is particular and legal, but is also broader than that. So I think, is it morally acceptable? It depends. I never was in a position of getting tenure. It depends on what you have to do to keep your job and how silent you have to be in the face of things. So, to me, you have to be willing to risk losing your job, but at the same time, do your job. You do your job well and better than everybody else so that you have that. But I think that's true of any work. You're not likely to work, even if you're working for NGOs in the United States, you're constantly raising money from who? Guess from who? So, it's a set of contradictions that you just have to live with, and at some point they could become unacceptable. Yeah, I think they could be, and you're always trying to judge that. I'm going to go to the questions that to two questions. I don't know if they're questions, to two issues. I think that you're right that it's very hard to integrate the two impulses, and the impulses are to act with moral clarity, to separate yourself from what your country's doing in your name and from your culture and often from your friends and family in order to be in solidarity with the people who are, being harmed the most. I think that is an important form of political action. I think it takes tremendous creativity. You guys are doing it, I love, going into the factory with cameras in the middle of the night and filming it all. It's just, I don't know if it was the middle of the night. Was it the middle of the night? Okay. I think, when the law is immoral, you have to defy the law. That was at the heart of the civil rights movement. It's at the heart of every struggle that afterwards gets airbrushed into being all beautiful and clean, So now we have Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States, who's an icon. It's unrecognizable as the person he actually was, right? He just was for peace and love, and he wanted black and white together. And you have none of the, I got organized by Dr. King when he came to Chicago. And I, had the luck of actually saying, I'm not going to miss this. I'm stepping out of law school, and I'm going to work on the west side of Chicago. And nothing about the King that we get on King Day is true about the struggle. So certainly, if you read, his letters from Birmingham jail or the speeches that he gave the last year and a half of his life, like Malcolm X, he was becoming radicalized without question and putting together, economic issues, the war issues, the militarism, consumerism, right, and racism together as the three great dangers that we faced. So there's nothing namby-pamby about that, and there's nothing liberal about that, and his death and his murder were an important silencing of that integration and that synthesis. So I'm only using him, but you could use Nelson Mandela. I mean, my students now think Nelson Mandela was a pacifist his whole life because they have this nice grandfatherly, wonderful, loving person. And so you just can't, it's very funny if if you get on this side of history, you're airbrushed into, blandness practically. So the Rivonia speech and 5 decades of armed conflict in South Africa apparently have nothing to do with majority rule in South Africa. It was just, I don't know what it was, apartheid giving up or something like that. So I say that only to say that in that tension between acting and let's say organizing, I'm not sure that's fair to organizing. I think, the dilemma is, and this happened to the Weather Underground for sure, for that period of 69. I think we were lucky enough to pull out of it. But without question, for that second half of 69, first part of 70, if you're all action and you feel that there's no hope for your population, that that Americans don't care that 2,000 Vietnamese are being murdered every single week, by the United States military, and we're now in the 9th year of the war, and we're approaching 1.5 million deaths in Southeast Asia. It's being expanded to Cambodia. It's been expanded to Laos. Very similar to what's happening in Afghanistan, where borders are now transgressed and the war has to bleed into the adjoining countries. So I think, our rage, our sense that we had to throw ourselves between the bullets and the Vietnamese, between the bullets and the Black Panther Party, is all understandable. And I think we were right on the content of what the two big issues of our times were. But what's dangerous, of course, is that you really do drive yourself toward a strategy that is militaristic, as we called it at the end of the day, where you put a military solution before a political solution. It's dangerous because it's self-destructive. It's dangerous because, like it or hate it, our job is to organize an opposition, to get more allies. So all of you in this room got here some way. Somebody convinced you, some set of circumstances convinced you, threw you into action. And one of the ways that we tried to pull out of it after our 3 comrades were killed on March 6, 40 years ago, in an explosion in the townhouse that we deduced after the fact, was an attempt to, kill military and civilian personnel on a military base nearby, was to argue that you can't put military or action before politics. You have to keep politics in command. I say that, but it's not anything you all don't know. It doesn't tell you what to do. It surely doesn't tell you. But it does say, if you have no hope of organizing your population to hate permanent war, to hate occupation, to hate the denial and racist subjugation of the people whose backs you're standing on, then, really the alternative does become militaristic if you have to act. And I think I just think it's dangerous. So you have to kind of make it up. I think you almost have to make it up. You almost have to say, I know I can organize people even when I think I can't, even when it's despairing. And so that's what I rate. I mean, I think there's a huge opposition to the war in U.S. wars right now. There's huge opposition to it. Most people in the United States don't think these wars can be won. Most people in the United States hate the idea of their own kids going to fight these wars. And yet, what? Silence, indifference, not knowing. You don't feel that we're a nation at war most places in the United States. Some places in the South where they send or small towns where they send all of their kids into the military, they feel it. But in Chicago, not really. And so, how do you make people feel the war? Well, that's what drove us then. And to some extent, it's our challenge now. I think humanizing the enemy is one of our big things. I think we actually made some progress on that around Vietnam. We haven't really around Iraq and Afghanistan. But where we actually, all learned and knew Vietnamese art and poetry and literature and food, and we followed the battles, and we knew that U.S. military power could not defeat a united people. We became convinced of that, and the Vietnamese helped teach us that. So I think did a good job, and journalists and artists in the field did a good job of humanizing the enemy. I don't think we've been doing a good enough job of that, so it stays invisible.